It's a question for Richard. How far apart did you have to stack all your stone piles? What was the distance between each stone pile?
I think they're about 2 metres centred, 2 metres apart, 2 or 2.5 each way.
How much did they cost each?
I'd have to work it out, divide the figure by however many we had. $70,000.
Maybe 80,000.
70 or 80,000 to do the stone piling, including the including the slab on top of it.
Did you have to have your land retested after you had the stone piles? Did they retest it and then reclassify your land, or not?
No. So I don't think it's officially TC1. What it is to a TC1 quality, in my opinion.
It gets tested all the time when they do it.
Well, they're testing the they test the stone piles, and interestingly, on our site, we're right at the foot of Monk's Spur. So at some stage, the rock would have just continued on down across our site, and it does. It continues on down under our site. So right down by the water, they drove the piles over 2 metres, and right near the road, they hit rock at about 1 metre under the ground. So we didn't have to go down too far.
What are stone piles? I was fascinated. I'm seeing, those wire cages with stones dropped in. What is
Yeah,
stone
they're a whole lot of
pile?
little river stones.
Yes.
In a cage.
They are in a
not a
cage.
cage. In a cage. In a
Basket.
yeah. No, not in a cable basket, but in a like container of some kind. That they drive with a big driver down into the ground.
Oh.
And what happens is
they're driven piles.
they drive, but they're contained within this drum kind of thing.
Right.
So what happens is they go down, and then they go down far enough to get good bearing, and so you can build on top. But what they also do, because they go down, the other one goes down there and there,
Yeah.
they start to densify the ground between. So the ground between,
Yes.
just like a lot of different types of piling, the ground between starts to get dense as well. So it's not just the stones holding up the slab.
No.
The ground in between is densifying,
becomes dense.
so it becomes less susceptible to liquefaction.
Gosh, that's interesting.
So it's just one way of doing it. I mean, we could have looked at a raft, floating a raft over top of the whole site, but because our site's so long and skinny, it would be more of a canoe. We figured out, got an engineer. It would have been more of a canoe, and we thought it was more likely to snap. So there would have been ways of breaking it, I'm sure, but we just wanted to. If it was a square site, a raft is a better option. Is a good option, but alongside we went for the stone piles.
So the container, I'm thinking rust. What on earth is it made of?
They pull it out, don't they?
Yeah,
So
they-
it's
I
like
think
a
they
funnel,
auger
isn't it?
them down into the ground,
Yeah.
auger it down, and they have a hole inside the auger, and then they...
And the stones go down
yeah,
there,
and
and then
as
they
they bring the auger
densify.
out, that fills the hole and they compact it, yeah. So,
Glad we brought the engineer along.
And that brings the thing out, doesn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So the container goes out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And by that time, the stones have joined hands.
Yeah.
For
And
goodness
then
sake, that's interesting.
A point, observation and a question. An observation is we built in South Shore, as you know, and it's TC3 apparently. When we had the geotech survey done, it was TC1-2 borderline, but nobody seems empowered to change it remains TC3. I don't even change it. But the question I had for you is, Richard, it's you. I love your house, by the way, Simon, but my question
It's okay.
Completely agree when the council seemed very conservative, and when you compound for different assumptions, you get almost impossible events. And I'd be very interested to know about your commissioner's report, if it's shareable, because I'm making exactly the same argument at the moment for the adaptation process, and it's sometimes quite difficult.
Yeah, the determination is public. You just Google Dalman Redcliffs determination,
Okay,
and you'll find it.
thank you.
But yeah, and that's something I hadn't thought about, or we hadn't thought about when we were writing the report, how they sort of build on one another. But it was the expert engineer that pointed it out, and then the commissioner agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and interestingly, just what I didn't say was the picture of the flood. That was 2014, and that was a 1 in 250 year flood, and that also coincided with an extra high tide. And when we build to the Building Act, we have to build to a 1 in 50 year life, and so we had to build to a 1 in 50 year flood. But then when we had to allow for that, but then we went for a determination. The commissioner says in a determination you have to go for a 1 in 100 year flood. So they saw that our house was probably not flooded based on their photograph, and a 1 in 250 year flood, which is far worse. So from a risk point of view, that was one of the key things.
Because the irony is, in the science literature, this is very clear, and it's been discussed many times, the impact of having multiple unlikely events. But actually, this is from the planning literature. That's why I'm interested.
Right.
Thank you.
The expert was Dr. Jack McCrumpshy from Oak in Wellington.
Okay, thank you.
You talked about there were sort of two prongs to it sounded like the flood effect, and the one I'm interested in is the effect on the land, which I hadn't thought about. I can imagine that they don't want us building houses in certain areas, and so they want to know how the flood will affect the building. But you suggested that, with your drains and everything on your land, that's also a thing that you have to consider what the water would do on the land. Do they want us to build hillocks or something to direct it back to the street, or what sort of response would?
Well, going back to the street wouldn't work at Redcliffs because in the floods the drains are all blocked and not working.
Yeah.
So we have to get the water off our site into the estuary. But the Building Act is concerned about the land, and it's concerned about what they call the building platform. And the building platform is an area about a metre or more out from your house, and from what we can gather, it's about getting access from your house in the time of a flood, or being able to use your house in the time of a flood. So this MB document that they wrote for Canterbury after the earthquake started to explain these things really well, and we used that as a lot of the basis because the Building Act just doesn't talk about reasons why at all. So yeah, it's about the building platform and why. Well, one of the decisions in a court case, they talked about it was unacceptable for people to be sloshing around in ankle deep water. I think it was the clause, if they're trying to get to their car to escape the floods. So interestingly, with our house, if it's coming from the sea, then it's tidal and the flood's going to go in an hour's time. If it's coming from the land, we were told that Main Road would be closed anyway. In fact, the flooding engineer told us Main Road would be closed, so you wouldn't be going anywhere. And because our house is built that high off the ground, there's no way any flood's going to get in 1.3 metres off the ground. So the safest place to be is in your house.
And they bought that in your case for the building consent. They agreed that you were up anyway and so on.
No.
Well, we had to be up
Yeah.
for resource consent and building consent.
Yeah.
But they didn't accept that as a good argument, such that they still wanted to put an inundation hazard on our certificate of title.
Yeah.
So we didn't want that on our certificate of title because we thought, look, might not be able to get insurance. People, any lawyers looking at it, if we want to sell it, they're going to say, well, no, it's going to flood. And sure, when you go for a PIM, on the PIM it says that there could be flooding issues on the site. But it's different being on a legal document, a certificate of title, and but everyone else down there just accept it. All the people who built, it's too hard.
Yeah.
too hard to, you have to do a determination.
What was the cost of that determination for you? I know that you did a lot of it yourself. Was it an expensive process or just a timely
So
process?
to apply, it's $350, so it's cheap. To do the work, we got a report done by Jacobs for $4,000, which was like a friendly
Rate.
Rate. I don't know, if I'd done this for a client, they probably wouldn't have wanted me to spend the amount of time on it, because I probably would have charged about $40,000 for the amount of time. But it's just because it's my time, and Marion's time, we'd spent a lot of time on it as well. We just spent as long as we needed to.
So would those things have come up in a pre-app? People always say, oh, do a pre-app or something. Is that the sort of thing you might expect, or is that much more detailed than you're going to get from a 24-year-old council person?
Yes, it is what should come up in a pre-app, and it doesn't always. And the building consent officer said, oh yeah, we look at things differently from the resource consent people, don't we? Oh, we should do something about that.
But also, just to jump in, sorry, so during the process, something changed in the law as well, and they made it much harder to build in these areas, and it was almost like we couldn't build at all, almost. And then the planner was actually quite helpful to us and basically showed that there had been a house about the size of our house many, many years ago, and allowed us to sort of use that as an argument, but we actually had to go through and do a whole lot of other submissions as well. So it got harder as the process was going.
Yeah,
and I think, the whole floor level's rising, and they've got tighter and tighter and things.
So at one stage, the planner said to me, I don't think you can build on that site. And then he said, oh, hang on, I've just found a resource consent for an addition to the previous house. So because there's a previous resource consent or a dispensation under the old Town and Country Planning Act, they said, well, that actually gives you the right to build on that site. Because at one stage, they were saying, well, yeah, you can't build on that, which was rather interesting when we just bought it.
So what height is your water level? Your precinct?
Under the ground or?
Underneath your piles, or down in your piles.
Don't know.
Underground.
I would say, yeah.
About a metre?
No, it depends on the tide.
Yeah.
But you're right, it is tide level, because the hole that we dug for the palm tree filled up to tide level, and the next door neighbours on the north side, who have holes in their seawall, the tide comes in, and an extra high tide, you can see the water on their side. So yeah, tide level. Which for us is somewhere between
0.8 and 2.4.
yeah.
Any other questions?
With the inundation maps and things, originally when you bought the section, for high flood and everything on your, it would have been on your limb already, was it?
Yeah.
And were you able to actually have that removed, were you?
No, it's still on the limb,
Still on the limb.
and PIM. So it's still on council documents.
Yeah.
The only thing what we got removed was off the certificate of title.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And look, I can't blame the council. I might have seemed that I was hooking into the council a bit, but just telling you the story of how it went, and I can't blame them because they're just following the Act, and their view was that under the Act we were going to flood, and I think that was probably a fair view. So it was up to us then to prove that we weren't going to flood according to the Act, which we did.
I guess the question is for both of you, perhaps a bit more for Richard, but how confident were you when you bought the section that you could actually do all these things? Because based on the story you've given, a lot of things could have gone wrong, and then the buck stops there, then you...
Yeah. I think architects are optimists.
I thought I'd get there.
Look, I think we do this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
We're telling the story, me in particular, of quite a journey. We've had clients doing the same thing elsewhere. and it's very difficult for our clients to get their head around and go through that journey. We're used to it. We've been in the Environment Court. We've stood up and spoken to the judge and all this kind of stuff. And I've had a council officer tell me that my Salvation Army building in Colombo Street looked like a combination of a warehouse, a slaughterhouse, no, warehouse, a factory, and something else. To which I replied, yeah, I've actually designed all three of those things. A plastics factory, that's right. I've designed a plastic factory at March Place in Belfast. I've added to a sausage factory, and I've designed the biggest warehouse on the South Island. And I can assure you our building looks nothing like those three buildings. So we're used to sort of standing up, doing these things and following the process. And it was probably more scary for Marion than me, I think, going through that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do. For Richard, when you were talking about site coverage earlier, and your decking took you up to close to 50. Was the decking no drama? You just put that through as a normal building consent, and that was sort of fine, or?
Yeah, it was drama. So we had to talk about why it had little impact, and so we had to go back to the reason for the site coverage maximum, and that's so the bulk of the building doesn't look huge in relation to everything else. Fortunately, we had two houses joined against each other on our north side, so that's big bulk going on there. So we could say we were getting it sort of similar to the next door neighbour on that side. And then we talked about the pitched roof, we talked about the cutouts, the courtyards, we talked about how no one's going to actually see it. Well, there's no windows to that neighbour, basically, looking out to us, because we had their plans. No one's going to see it from the sea, so that, well, unless you're boating. And so the bulk of it's not important from the sea. The bulk of it's more about, from what we argued, was from the road. So you go back to the reason why the requirement in the city plan is there, and then you form an argument about how you comply or you've mitigated the issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it does indicate how each area is very different. Simon is on the coastal side of Rockinghorse Road, which is not in the residential unit overlay or the high flood hazard management area. His rules are quite different. Redcliffs is different again. The Hill is different. Those in the residential unit overlay different again. So it's important to think about when you are going to build in any of those areas to understand where you are building. And as Simon says, find an architect that understands coastal areas. Find a planner. There's a couple around that really do understand the coastal rules. They are really complicated, and some of them are quite old. At the moment, because of the coastal hazards, we are still using some of the very old coastal rules, very old operative plan, and some of the city councillors are not as au fait with some of those, and some of the planners actually have a really good handle on it. So it's important, if you are going to build, is to go to a planner first, and as someone says, do your resource consent, so you really understand what your envelope is and where you can build and how you can build. And also embrace, as Simon has also said, embrace the site that you're going to build on, because in a lot of those places you might not be able to build the massive concrete mansion, but you can build a very cool house that might be on poles or in some other way. So it's about being able to build a house that actually works for that environment. So as long as you go in with an open heart on what you can achieve, then there's some houses that are being built down there that are really quite wonderful. And same with on the Redcliffs side as well.
I think that for us, constraints are good, because constraints are opportunities. If you've just got a big site in the middle of nowhere, how do you draw the first line? What happens? You know, the house. There'd been a house on our side, designed by Wolf Burmester. His plan was quite similar to mine. It's not, there's a courtyard. You entered there, you lived out there. There's a courtyard in the middle. It's sort of like common sense. By the time you work through all the constraints, often the buildings can design themselves.
Did you guys have any issues with insurance through the process? Insurance? Was that because you didn't have the hazard notice? Or?
No, we got insurance, no problem, and it wasn't to do with the hazard notice.
With the insurance, sorry.
Go on.
People talk about insurance here a lot. Even if you're in a hazard zone, it doesn't affect theft, fire, all the main things. Sort of why you have insurance. Like, if there is an issue, it's only going to be about the flooding side, and I think, it's an all-risk policy. So, but we didn't have a problem. All they want to know is that it's got code of compliance. That's the document they asked for.
We got insurance. It's reasonably straightforward. With a new build, and insurers are reasonably confident. When you'll be taking on insurance on an older house that's been through earthquakes, they get a little bit worried about that. And as Marion pointed out, we're in the flooding areas. From talking to people, one of the things I've come across is a high excess just for flooding, and the rest of the things are unaffected. So it is certainly possible to get insurance at this stage.
Through the standard insurance companies.
Yeah. No, I was able to get. I didn't have to go to Lloyd's of London or anything like that.
Great. Hey, thank you so much, guys, for sharing your experience with your coastal builds and also your beautiful homes that you obviously clearly both really enjoy living in. And
You're welcome.
I'm sure many of us would enjoy living in those houses. Richard, I did look at your house and think, how the heck did you get the opportunity to build that platform out onto the water? I thought that until I saw the drawings to say that actually that was your land and you were actually still building out into your land.
Our balcony is 100 mils beyond the end of the deck there, the boundary.
Yeah.
So
Pretty nifty.
yeah.
Thank you so much, and look, thank you everybody for coming. I hope you found it interesting and some knowledge. And of course, these are obviously architects that are built in various coastal areas. So do feel free to talk to them if you need some information or you might want to. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next CCRU event. Who knows what that will be? Just keep a lookout for it on Facebook or Eventbrite. And as I said before, thank you, Richard and Simon. Thanks for coming today.
You're
and
welcome.
You can watch this online.